Welcome to the Call Guys podcast, co-hosted by Kevin Hopp and Ronen Passar. This podcast is all about sales development and the art and science of building high-performing outbound sales teams. Tune in weekly to hear live cold calls and also to hear Kevin and Ronen interview some of the top names in sales development. Let's dive right into this week's episode and see what we can learn.
Welcome back to another edition of the Call Guys podcast. This is going to be our first guest episode. I'm your host, Kevin Hopp. Got my co-host here, Ronen Passar. Say what up.
What's up, everybody? Thrilled to be back here, especially with our guest today. One of my all-time favorites. I'm not going to lie, I'm a bit of a fanboy.
What's up, guys? How's it going? Thanks for having me on. I didn't know I was the first guest, so I'm excited. Let's get into it.
And we should let the audience know, if you're listening, that is the voice of Jed Mahrle.
The one and only.
If you don't follow him on LinkedIn, what are you doing? What are you doing? That's my question for you. You guys should reach out to Jed on LinkedIn, ask him for all the advice, ask him for all of his personal time. Just kidding. You should absolutely follow him on LinkedIn. So, Jed, you are actually really big in the outbound world. On the other side of the spectrum, quote unquote, from Ronen and I, we're the call guys. We can't make it more obvious that we love cold calling. And you work for a company called Mailshake, and you actually have positioned yourself as a bit of an expert in the email space. Why don't we kick things off by hearing a little bit of your background and how you got to be so good at cold email?
Yeah, so I started as an SDR apprentice. This was in office, and I couldn't do cold email. Nobody was really doing cold email there. It was a very cold call heavy environment. And so I started my first 6 to 9 months as an SDR just hammering the phones. It was hundreds and hundreds of calls every single day. I made it my thing to make the most calls every single day. And to be honest, on cold calling alone, I could not hit my quota. I was struggling. I was always kind of around there, and I never really wanted to pick up cold emailing. I think cold call is the best thing to learn first, in my opinion, because it really, gets you thick skin. But honestly, I just started learning cold email because I needed a more consistent way to hit my number, and it wasn't producing any results. And so I started diving really deep into it. I've always loved writing, copywriting. And so that's kind of where it started, just struggling to hit quota from only cold calling. And I wanted to kind of bring that piece in with it. That's
awesome, man. And I think everyone's got one of these stories when you're in the trenches as a sales development rep, which is like that story of the moment it changed. You know, what was that time for you when you were like, oh, I get it now. It clicked.
Oh, that's a good question. I think so. At first, I had no idea what I was doing. And so I really started studying actual cold email frameworks. And so it started by literally just going on LinkedIn. People are always sharing what emails worked, which ones didn't. And so I would literally just take an email that somebody shared, try to copy it for my own product. And then after I started copying emails that were working or these templates that people were sharing, I started to actually learn the frameworks behind why they work. And it was kind of from that point that I started pretty much using the same framework for pretty much all of my emails. And it's pretty simple. It's just 3 sentences. I like to keep my emails as short as possible. First sentence is relevance. Why am I reaching out? Usually it's the problem that I lead with. Second sentence is the value prop with social proof. Third sentence is call to action. And sticking to that tight framework has always allowed me to keep my emails super short, tight, and relevant. But yeah, that clicking moment was just literally just trying to go on LinkedIn and copying other people's templates. And then I actually started learning about the frameworks behind them.
Wow. I also get almost all of my cold email advice from LinkedIn, to be honest.
Same.
I've in some of the consulting engagements I've done, I've had SDRs say, hey, Kevin, I appreciated your cold email lesson. I always talk about cold email because I do believe it's an important piece of the pie. I just don't, I don't have this deep depth of knowledge on it. So I will straight up go to LinkedIn and find a post from you, find a post from Junior Lardy, find posts from other folks, the Lavender team. They do a great job of showing you what good email looks like. And I'll copy those posts, the link to the post, and just send it to the SDRs and be like, follow these guys. These guys go as deep on email as I go on phone. And there's so much to learn there. One of the things I saw Junior doing, which I think is awesome, is he takes screenshots of emails and blacks out the other part. So you get to actually see what gets people to respond.
Yeah. And so many people are doing that, right? And you can, and just as many of the good ones, there are the bad ones that people are bashing. So you know what to do and what not to do. If you spend a good amount of time on there, whether it's good or not, it's there for you to learn from. And so, yeah, that's it. I think it's like really 3 steps where you start copying, you learn the frameworks, and then you start coming up with your own creative ideas. It's kind of like the 3 stages, in my opinion, of how you start to get good at cold email.
Totally. So what are some of the worst things that new SDRs, or at least SDRs who are new to cold email, are doing that you would say you got to stop doing this?
It might sound generic, but I'll dive in deeper. It's just too many run-on sentences, too much in one email. And so usually like SDRs, they just go through training. They have all this knowledge on their product, all the problems they solve. And so with your emails, if you want to have like a good sequence, because it's obviously not just about one cold email, nobody really books a meeting off of one singular cold email and know their activities around it. You have to break it down so that each email only focuses on one specific product or feature. And then that allows you to have a relevant sequence because you can focus on a new problem, a new feature for the rest of the sequence. And so the biggest mistake is folks will just lead with all of that up front. And then kind of going along with that is just shorter sentences, really working on like one of the best pieces of advice I got for writing is cut it in half. So whether you're writing a blog post, a LinkedIn post, a Slack message to your boss, whatever it is, write it out, cut it in half. And if you actually try to take that exercise seriously, you'd be surprised at how much filler you can remove. And I've always tried to take that philosophy when it comes to emails.
It's that famous line, if I had more time, I would have written less.
Yeah.
If I had more time, I've never heard that.
I let's see if I could find the source of it real quickly. But yeah, that's like a famous quote from Mark Twain, I believe. Like,
oh, there you go.
But if I had more time, would have written less. And the idea is like, when you have time, you can refine and cut out all the filler. It's true with email too.
Yeah.
It's so hard. It's so hard to, I think the nature of the SDR job makes it difficult to write good cold emails. Now, here's what I mean by the nature of the SDR job. A lot of SDRs, like I would call like the training that these bigger organizations, particularly organizations that have a training structure, like let's say like Series B and beyond, like you get indoctrinated into like the way of the company. Right. Mm-hmm. And as an SDR, you were like living and breathing in this, like, all right, our stuff is the best. We are the leading solution. We have all these big logos, and you're like brainwashed to believe that like the number one thing I need to tell everybody is we're the best. We're just the best. How could you not want to? Right. Yeah. And that indoctrination leads people to want to word vomit. Well, you know, and I've sat with SDRs on Zoom and watched them try to write an email, and I'm like, you know, that's like a 25-word sentence. And they go, well, I can't not tell them about the fact that we have 24/7 support. Like, I can't miss that. And I'm like, you can. Like, we should cut that out. And they go, oh man, because it's like you learn. They know too much. Yeah, almost right. And this goes back to a hot take that Ronan and I agree on intimately, which is, you know, SDRs should know a little bit less. They shouldn't be able to do a whole demo. Like SDRs shouldn't be able to walk through an entire demo and know every piece of it. Because at a certain stage, if you know too much, it's a really bad thing.
It's the curse of knowledge. It's the curse of knowledge. When you know too much, you suddenly lose that ability to communicate in a way that makes sense to your prospect. It happens all the time with copywriting, with marketers who are trying to create good websites and landing pages. If you know too much, it's like, hang on a second, the person who you're reaching out to doesn't know all this stuff, right? Yeah. So you got to go back to that mindset of not knowing these things, and it's impossible. Once you know all the stuff, all the things, all the features, like Kevin said, you're indoctrinated in how our company does this thing. It's almost game over for so many in terms of actually being able to write compelling copy, emails, messages, whatever, which is actually brings us to another point. And I'm curious to hear your take on this, Jed. So let's say you've got new hires. Yeah. 2 questions here. How soon are they actually doing outreach? And what is their first touch? What channel do you use for the first touch?
Yeah, so I've always tried. When I've onboarded new reps, I've usually been at like smaller orgs where we don't have a huge training regimen in place. And so my philosophy has always been try to get them on the phones as fast as possible. And I usually want them on the phones because that's, if you start off like your training, I guess, with LinkedIn and email and you ease them into phones, you kind of create this habit where it's not like a phone first mentality, which even though we work at a cold email company, I talk about cold email, I still think that's the most important channel. And so, yeah, we start with the phones. But in terms of training as well, and something I want to touch on that you guys were both saying, is I try to train them on the customer's perspective, right? So you just talked about how when you go through onboarding, all you learn about is your perspective, your features, your products. But the biggest thing I try to train on in the first couple of weeks is understanding in a very crystal clear way your ICP and their problems and getting extremely specific. How do they talk? What are their problems? That's the most important thing when it comes to cold calling, when it comes to cold emailing, is being able to communicate the problems that they have in their language. And so it's easy for me because we sell to sales leaders and I am a sales leader. So I just tell my SDRs, here's how I think, here are my problems, here's how I communicate. But in my previous role, when I was selling to IT folks, for example, I would go internal, talk to my IT leader, get his feedback on our emails and the emails he gets. It's really about understanding your buyer and less of understanding your product, I would say.
I want to emphasize that again as a great tip right there. So go internal to your company, to the person as the persona that you typically reach out to, and ask them for feedback. But also one of the other tips, I don't know if you did this at all, Jed, one way I would quickly try to improve the training for understanding your buyer and your persona is I use job listings, job posts. So here's the hack. If you're trying to sell to a mid-level cybersecurity manager, go find 3 or 4 jobs for that role at companies that you ideally target and read through them, digest them, get familiar with what the ideal responsibilities are. And that's one way to put yourself in their shoes a little bit better and understand what their day-to-day is, which comes back to then how you can talk their talk and speak their language, understanding more about their world.
Yeah.
That's what I call talking the talk, right? Getting to the point where you can talk the talk with people that have the business problems is really difficult for an SDR. But Jed, what's awesome that Ronan and I light up when you say it is like, get them on the phone quickly, because if you don't, you create that habit of like, well, I wouldn't want to like call them. Like, what if they're? I don't want to interrupt them. I mean, geez, what if they get mad at me? And it's like outbound is like, you got to break some eggs. You're always going to break some eggs.
Yeah.
But you can't learn. You're not going to learn everything you need to learn from marketing. And marketing is going to give you every schlick, every web page, everything, and every case study. And you think that it's all roses. And when you go out to the market and have the conversations, you're like, oh, our competition does pretty good for these people, and they do not have a problem with it. And that's often I feel like that's a moment that the faster an SDR has that moment of, okay, my solution is not the second coming of Jesus Christ. My solution plays a role, but I've figured out what that role is now. Now they can articulate that value so much more effectively, whether it's on the phone, via email, via LinkedIn. Curious to hear how, because you work for a company that does email, you're a big email guy. How do you see the channels? Let's call it the big 3, right? Email, phone, and social. What's your proprietary blend for how you like to teach SDRs to use these 3 when it comes to outbound?
Yeah. So I think the context of where we're at right now and most of the companies I've been at is that both companies have had pretty large markets and relatively early-ish stage. So it's not like we have only 100 select accounts we can go after. If that's the case, my strategy would change. And I've been in that situation, but most of the time it's been more early stage where there's a larger market to go after. And so just want to set that context before I explain my blend. What we like to do is do a relatively high volume of email sending. All of my SDRs have multiple domains. We're doing deliverability best practices. That's like probably a whole nother conversation, but we're making sure that these domains are healthy and they're actually going to land in the inbox. And then we're sending a lot of relevant emails that are honestly mostly automated, but we're segmenting our list really well. So we're getting really specific with the types of folks we're reaching out to, what sort of buying triggers they have. We're sending out a lot of relevant emails that are mostly automated. And then most of the time, since we're not spending a lot of time personalizing, is spent on the phones calling the people that are engaging the most. So we do a lot of emails. We typically start with that. We'll do LinkedIn touches. We have some messaging and stuff that we send. But then most of the time is spent on the phones. We're prioritizing the people that are opening and clicking our emails the most down to the ones that aren't. We just prioritize the hottest leads first when it comes to calling. But that's kind of what our blend looks like.
I love that. So I want to highlight that one more time, which is you're prioritizing. That's already a big deal. So many people don't So you're prioritizing the folks who are clicking, opening, the hot leads, whatever you define as a hot lead. And those are the ones you do call first, which is a great approach here.
Exactly.
At what point do you cut bait? At what point do you say, this prospect's no longer worth reaching out to? Or do you have some way of like having them recycle?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So we have like our sequences are typically 5 or 6 emails, usually around 4 to 5 phone calls, and then a couple of LinkedIn steps. Halfway through the sequence, if they aren't opening any of our emails, if it's like they haven't opened a single email and their phone just goes straight to ringer every time, or it's you don't hear their name in the voicemail, that sort of thing, we call them 3 times. We stop calling them at that point and we swap them out with somebody else from the organization. Other than that, once they get through the sequence, if they're still engaging, within our Mailshake's a sales engagement tool. Most sales engagement tools will let you do this. But if they're like what we qualify as a hot lead, so they've opened it a certain amount of times, then we will move them to more of a nurture campaign where it's a lot of like content and just honestly helpful resources around the problem we solve, which is email deliverability. And then we will circle back usually like 6 months from there and do another, highly targeted campaign. And so it is kind of like a good cycle. But yeah, if they're still engaging, we put them into more of a longer nurture sequence after that.
That's awesome.
Makes sense.
One of the last things I want to get into, just because you touched on it, and I think it's something that is becoming more and more and more relevant, as you know. You could write the most beautiful email, have an incredible follow-up cadence with value and all this wonderful stuff, and then go right to spam. It's like game over. Give us the quick hits for some of the ways to make sure you're not landing in spam. What would you advise people?
Yeah, so I'll name through a few. So one of them is removing like spam words and phrases from your email templates. There's a lot of like HubSpot has a really good article on this of like 400 words you should remove from your sequences. If you do that immediately, you should see your open rates go up a good amount. Another one is using a domain warming tool. So there's a lot of them out there, but you can basically increase the engagement going on in your email to make it look like to Gmail and Outlook that you have a better reputation. And as a result, you'll land in more inboxes. Removing links from your signature. Honestly, this might be controversial. We've looked into it. You can remove the opt-out link if you have a clear way to opt out. So what I mean by that is by having an opt-out link in all of your cold emails that you send through sales offer outreach or whatnot, lots of times that just immediately gets picked up and flagged by other receiving email servers. So instead we have PS, if you don't want to hear from me anymore, let me know and I'll stop. That's completely fine. You'll get more responses as a result of that, even if they're negative responses, but that improves your reputation with Gmail because you're getting more responses. And honestly, we could keep going, but there's a lot of different things you can do. Those are some of the biggest ones I'd say. But yeah, just look up deliverability best practices and I would try to implement as many as possible.
Right on. All right. Well, Jed, we're going to wrap here in just a moment. And one thing we like to do before we wrap is some rapid fire questions. All right.
Let's do it.
You ready for it?
Yes, sir.
All right. And these, let's just dive right into it. So the first one, before you cold call, research or no research? What's your take?
No research. I mean, the research we do is done on the segmentation. Right. So if you segment your lists right and put them in separate sequences, for example, you know exactly what you're going to say when you go into the call.
Don't give them all the secrets, Jed. All right. Next one. How soon did you get a new hire on the phone?
Honestly, like my goal is as soon as possible. So within the first week, if you can. If you start on Monday, Get them on the phones Friday.
I know I liked you. Cold email, personalized or relevant?
Relevant, but there's a case for personalized. If you have, you know what I mean? I talked about it earlier when it comes to context. If you have fewer accounts to go after, maybe it makes more sense to take a little bit more of a personalized approach. But in general, you're pretty much always going to be safe with just taking the relevance approach. All right. Social selling. Here we go. Mention a post that they commented on or don't do that. Don't do that in most cases unless you have a really good reason. And the only reason why is because it's picking up a lot of steam right now and buyers catch on to patterns like that. And so I feel like if I see another email that says that in the preview text, I'm probably not even going to open it. And so maybe it worked a while ago, but the issue is now it's just become this pattern that buyers recognize and they're not even going to open your email. LinkedIn Connect, message or no message? Typically no message. We just try to be quicker with it, and we sell to sales and marketing folks. They accept it most of the time anyways, so we're in good shape with that. All right. Last two here. Parallel dialer or phone validated leads? Oh, that's a really good question. I've never thought about that. I feel like I'd rather have a parallel dialer just because they're so awesome to use. It's like it just feels cool. I'd probably have to do the numbers in my head to figure out what makes more sense mathematically, but probably parallel dialer.
Nice. And last but not least, reply to the unsubscribe email or let it go.
Let it go. You're going to hurt your deliverability.
Love it.
Let it go. Awesome.
Jed Mahrle, folks, the one and only. If you don't already know, he's got an incredible newsletter where he shares a lot of tips and tactics. Jed, tell them where they can find you.
Yeah, find me on LinkedIn and then check out my newsletter. Thanks for shouting it out. And thanks for having me on, guys. And I appreciate all the kind words as well. This is good.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe. Check out next week. We're going to be doing live cold calling. And then the next week after that, we're going to have another informational podcast. We got a bit of a unique blend going. But thanks for tuning in. And Jed, let's keep in touch, man.
Hell yeah, for sure.